The countdown to the Kentucky Derby is on, and there is no better way to get into the spirit of this epic race than to talk to the man that brings this race to life. He is the voice of some of the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, 2 minutes of pure adrenaline that results in one unforgettable call. For more than a decade, Travis Stone has been the man behind the mic, making memories for us. And before he steps onto the stage at Churchill Downs on the first Saturday in May, he's going to make history this weekend at Colonial Downs. Well, if you recall the Virginia Derby, and that's a big deal because it's kind of making its big debut along the road to the Kentucky Derby. And Travis, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, and coming to you live from Richmond.
You're
my
there.
Second time here. I didn't realize it's not that much farther south than Louisville. I was expecting a little bit warmer weather, but it's nice here, so hopefully this weather holds for all 3 days. Looking forward to it.
I know you certainly are, and we're excited for this race. I mean, Virginia Derby is not new to Colonial Downs. However, the fact that these horses and these trainers and these jockeys, can punch their ticket to the Oaks and the Derby, that is new, and that is a big deal. And I'm curious, as you kind of draw back the curtain and realize, oh, wow, this is kind of another history-making moment that you're going to be the voice for this. What goes through your head for that?
I try not to think about those things, to try and stay calm and just in the moment and present. You can wig yourself out pretty quickly if you overanalyze and hyperanalyze these situations. So I am approaching this weekend like I would any other big race. I've done some prep work. I've watched some replays. I've thought about things that might happen, and we'll let the race unfold as it unfolds and try not to overdo it. I haven't called races since Thanksgiving week when Churchill ended. So one thing, I'm thinking about the voice a little bit. I'm not going to shout and scream my way through the first couple of days. Want to get the voice warmed up. So yeah, looking forward to it. It's a lot of fun. This is, from what I'm told, the event is basically sold out. There's no seating available. It's general admission only.
Right.
And it just shows you the power of the Derby. And it truly does. It's Americana. So it'll be fun to be a part of that.
You mentioning kind of the layoff between calling your last race here at Churchill Downs, now being out there. What do you do to begin to warm it up? I think when I go on vacation and I come back and I start talking again, I can tell that I don't quite have the air capacity or I don't know, there's just an inability to speak for a long period of time. I know that sounds super simple, and what you're doing is super technical. What do you do to prepare and build up for that then?
Yeah, like even in our conversation right now, these are not the voices we'd probably use if we were sitting around the dinner table with friends, right? It's just
Right.
a different level, a different sort of component to it. So you have to think about that. I have, for the past 3 or 4 years, utilized some vocal warm-ups. It's about a 15-minute MP3 file that I play on my phone on the way to the track. And I've been doing it this week just to kind of get the vocal cords moving a little bit.
Is it similar to like what a singer would do to prepare?
Yeah, I'm not going to sing for you, but there is some singing components. If somebody wants to ride to the track with me, I like to tell them no, because I don't want them in the car when we have to do these sing-song exercises together. No, it's that, and it's a lot of water. I use Ricola lozenges, almost like it's my job. I found those to be the best, so I consume quite a bit of those to keep the throat coated. It's really just about thinking and just being aware of it and cognizant, and you don't need to shout and scream or what have you. So, and like doing interviews like this helps because, like I said, we're using a different sort of level of our voice. So I did one the other day, and it was about 30 minutes, and for about an hour after, I was like, man, I feel it. Like, I'm just not used to talking like that. So luckily 2 days, though, to kind of break into it.
So that is how you prepare the voice for the work you do. How do you then prepare for knowing what horses are on the field, the silks, the numbers? How do you get ready for that without overloading your brain and thinking I've got to memorize everything?
I would say, I don't look at it as overloading the brain, because even if you bury something in your subconscious, you never know when you can pull on it or when your brain's going to pull it out from deep in the archives, if you will. So I don't think there's such thing as being over-prepared.
Yeah.
I think if you prepare enough, then you just put yourself in a better spot when random things happen. For this particular race, I've watched the replays of all the horses, kind of got an idea of what their silks look like. I'll do another pass on that and trying to think about how's this race going to be run? What are the storylines? What are the scenarios? I tweeted it out yesterday. I think one of the stories in this race is it's a 1-turn mile and an eighth. So it's basically a half-mile run before they hit the far turn. So that is just kind of an interesting dynamic you don't get on the Derby trail. So thinking about stuff like that and trying to leave as little to chance as possible.
I know you never know. You could make history with this race. There could be some wild stories that come out of Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's great about racing, right? You just never know. I mean, I hope it's sort of straightforward and exciting, so it doesn't make my particular job any more difficult or, anxiety ridden. But yeah, that's the best part about racing. You never know what's going to happen.
Your background is you grew up in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's a kid from upstate New York? How does he end up calling some of the biggest races in the country?
Yeah, so I grew up an hour north of Saratoga, and my dad was a racing fan through his dad. And actually, my mom became a racing fan when she met my dad. So we used to go to the races all the time. In fact, my dad would save his vacation days so that we could go. He was a New York State police officer. And so we'd go for 2 or 3 weeks straight. I just fell in love with it. And I was a very dynamic kid. I would come home and I could instantly get right into whatever I wanted to do. And I'd pretend to be a race caller. I'd call matchbox cars. I'd call marble races. I'd ride my bike like I was a jockey. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a jockey. And I mapped out a diet plan that included only 2 bowls of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. That quickly, I scuttled that idea pretty quickly.
That is really fun. Yeah.
But like when I was 12, I don't know what it is, but I this is what I want to do. And I wrote a letter to Tom Durkin and I said, my name's Travis. Yada, yada, yada. And he wrote me back, gave me some advice, and I was on my way. And, just did everything I could to sort of, get on this path, and a couple of good breaks here or there. And here we are.
Do you remember how the call came up for you to be at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby?
I do.
I'm curious about that because I caught up with Steve Buttleman a couple weeks ago, and he described like all the things that could go wrong that morning went wrong on the way to the audition. And he never thought he would get it, but things lined up in a way like it was fate.
Yeah.
And were things lining up for you that this was meant to be?
Yeah. I was working at Aqueduct that winter. I worked at Aqueduct for a few winters. And I could tell you I don't remember the streets, but I remember the PATH station that we were going back to Hoboken. And we're between subways, Dave racing at Aqueduct heading home. And I got a call from John Asher. And he said, how'd you like to be the voice of the Kentucky Derby? And I was traveling with my buddy Dave, who also worked at Aqueduct at the time. And I said, I have to miss this train. I got to take this call. So we stood out. It was freezing cold. We stood outside for like 25 minutes waiting for the next train, but it was worth it to get that call, So yeah, that was pretty cool. It was mid to late December.
And Travis, to get the call from the late, great John Asher, right? That's probably one of your moments that you're like, I'll never forget 100%. That.
Oh, I have a memory burn. I mean, I have a good memory. I have a lot of memory burns. I definitely have a memory burn of where I was standing when that call came through. Yeah.
In a decade, I know you've encountered a lot of crazy calls. Are there some that are up there pretty high? I'd love to begin with last year because that was pretty wild. And as you are looking through, as they're approaching the finish line last year with Forever Young, Sierra Leone, and Mystic Dan, how do you end that? And do you remember exactly what you said?
I remember what I said because I've probably watched it 500 times since then. But so my first Derby in 15 was American Pharoah. I'd never been to the Derby. So I had to, and anybody who's been to the
no
Derby,
pressure, right?
Yeah, anybody who's been knows that actually getting to the Derby is the most stressful part of the day, whether it be parking or security or just navigating the crowd. So I learned all of that, right off the rip, and fast forward 10 years to last year where I'd really tried to work on some aspects of my calling over the past 3 or 4 years. I don't want to say doubled down, but like really took a more intensive focus on some things. And so there's a lot of stuff I've been working on leading up to that race. And I just remember when they turned for home, in my binoculars, there was what felt like 10 horses. And in the back of your mind, you're like, oh no, don't do this to me, But, and the whole thing of like the idea of if you're over-prepared, you tend to get lucky. I just happened to dip back down inside with my binoculars and saw Brian Hernandez with the ride of the year come through toward the inside and grab the lead. And then I happened to go back outside right when Forever Young and Sierra Leone were effectively leaning on each other, costing both of themselves the race. I don't know who was necessarily at fault the most. I think both of them could have won had they traveled a straight course. And this is just a fortunate situation. And then they're coming to the wire. And my booth at Churchill is a little bit before the finish line. So it's not a great angle. In fact, the building, Churchill Downs, and the racetrack are not parallel. There's actually an angle between them. So it's kind of an optical illusion from the booth. It's not a straight line across the track the way the finish sits. So I don't call a lot of photos there because it's challenging. But I do remember just, your adrenaline is like so hard. I felt like Mystic Dan's nose was down first. I didn't dare call him the winner, but this is an announcer thing. When there's a photo, whatever horse we say first is the one we thought won. And I got the try right, I believe. I did it. I got the try right. So that was another memory burn. When they turned for home and there was 10 horses in the binoculars, you could just feel your heart sink. It's like, oh no, don't do this.
After they crossed the finish line, and then we saw the images of exactly how close that actually was. Do you sometimes begin to second guess yourself and think, okay, maybe, wait, what did I say? Did I mislead people? Or do you doubt yourself sometimes and think, oh man, I should have said this instead?
I think one of the things that when you're calling races, if you allow yourself we all make mistakes in what we do, and nobody's perfect. And it's all about just getting right back into the action and recovering. So my brain, I've really tried to force it to be like, if you have a little mistake, if you have a screw up with words or something doesn't come out right, or like what we call word salad, you just have to keep going. You have to, don't think about it and keep going. But after the Derby, you can't help but think about what you just said for those 2 minutes, because it's just the 2 minutes of the year that matter the most, And I knew that when I said photo finish and kind of rattled off the horses, I felt good about how I put a bow on my part of the race. But then you do start to think about, oh, well, did I have that horse right? Did I have this horse right? I mean, I remember when Rich Strike won, I thought I was having a stroke. He had this like really intense
Take me through that. When they turned from home, take me through Rich Strike.
Yeah, so that was, both Larry and I picked up Rich Strike late. And we've talked a lot about it. Horses coming up the inside is rare. Almost hardly ever happens. I'm going to say 1 out of every 20 races. So he kind of caught us both by surprise. But this goes back to the preparation where flashcards and replays, and it's happening so quick that you just have to trust your instincts. And as an example, Rich Strike's saddle cloth looked like it was white. Just, the nature of the day. And then it's not a color you see often, whatever number it was, 22. It's not a color you see often, but it looked white. And the white number 2 was Happy Jack. I think it was his name, for Calumet Farm. But your brain's like, oh my gosh, that's red and white silks, but that's a white saddle cloth. That's not, it's not this, it's not that. And you just have to trust it and go with it. And obviously it was a very bizarre result and totally unexpected. They crossed the wire. I still don't know if I called it right. I wasn't confident until they put his number up on the board and I saw his name. And I also felt a little bit good. Ed DeRosa, who I think he worked for Churchill at the time, texted a group of us in TV and something to the effect of like, what just happened? And I was like, okay, well, that just means something crazy happened. We got it right. So, but I will say, I sat down on the couch in the booth because I thought I was having a stroke. I got like this tension headache in the back of my neck. And I was like, man, oh man, you're too young for this. You keep doing this. But
Travis, that's like when you say like how the anxiety or you thought you were having a stroke, your voice though always sounds calm. There's an excitement about it, but there's this calmness to it, steadiness. How do you maintain that when inside you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my mind?
There's 2 things that I do. One of them I learned at auctioneer school. I went to auctioneer school when I was in college. And when you learn how to auctioneer, you get up in front of a group of people. And it is by far the most intimidating thing in the world, because auctioneering is not public speaking. And you can sort of get up and talk, but to get up and auctioneering, if I'm going to get 20, if I'm going to get, it's hard. And I got up there one day.
Plus, you don't want to get these numbers wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You don't want to sell somebody something the wrong price and everybody gets mad. Mm-hmm. High stakes.
Yeah, exactly. So I was so nervous and I sucked. It was no good. And the instructor was a guy from, I think, Oklahoma or Dallas, Texas. Real Southern draw, older gentleman, cowboy hat, big belt buckle. And he came up, he goes, I'm going to give you some advice. He goes, before you get on the microphone, you need to go bing, bong, bing, bong. I said, what do you mean? He goes, bing, bong, bing, bong. He says, do it. And so I go, bing, bong, bing, bong. And that last bong, he goes, is where you start to talk. So it's like, bing, bong, bing, bong. Welcome to Churchill Downs, not welcome to Churchill Downs. And he said, because when you start high, you have nowhere else to go. He goes, in the natural nerves and anxiety of a human, you want to start to talk faster. Your throat tightens. You want to get a little bit high. He goes, but if you go bing, bong, and you force yourself to start down here, now you have your whole range to go in to work with. And once you start to run out of range and you feel that, that's when you get nervous and tension.
You can't get air. You can't breathe properly.
The air is everything, as you know.
Yeah.
That was one thing. And then I can't remember who first told me this or who I first heard it from. But somebody once said, when you're on the verge of a moment that you anticipate being extremely nervous, just ask yourself, would you rather trade places with anybody else? And it's a great calming mechanism. It works. Both of those things work. Yeah.
When you're describing how you're looking through your binoculars, it almost sounds like you have a system to where you are looking at certain times. Is that true? Like, take me through, when that gate opens, the horses take off out of the starting gate. What's going through your mind? What are you looking for first? And kind of then from where do you trail?
It definitely depends on the strength of the favorite. So for last year's Derby, as an example, Fierceness was a favorite. My eyes were glued to him coming out of the gate. But you have to move quickly. So you want to first catch whether or not he broke well. And he didn't. He actually didn't break that well last year. And I made a comment about it in the call. Big stories. When the favorite doesn't break, things kind of change. And that applies to day in and day out racing too. But you always want to nail who breaks the best. And then if anybody doesn't break at all. And then you let the race sort of develop and you go back to the front and you work your way through the field. And the same thing applies in the Derby, just on a bit of a different scale with 20 horses and obviously the excitement and stuff. Catch the start, whoever your focus horses are. So Fierceness, like I'll go Fierceness and I'll quickly look at 2 or 3 others I think are important. Not every year, depends on the year. And then it's all about, okay, how's this pace setting up? And then particularly for the Derby, because there's 20 horses, about mid-stretch, I try and reset and not take a breath, but it is, okay, let's go back to the front and let's work our way through the entire field. It was great advice from Tom Durkin. He said, when you call races day in and day out, he goes, you're used to calling 8 or 9 horse fields. 20 in the Derby is daunting, and you're going to feel like you're running out of time the entire opening half mile. And he said, you just have to keep going. Even when you feel like you've botched it, just keep going. And he says, and when you're done with the 20th horse, you'll look up, there'll be a half mile time, and there'll be 5 furlongs to go. And he goes, and you just call the race. And that was stout advice. So true. So true.
And that's on a good day when the sun's out and you have nice weather. How complicating can things get we've seen some of those races at Churchill that have just been downpours in the slop. How does that impair or affect how you would call a race?
When Justify won, were you at Churchill that year by any chance when Justify won? Remember how awful it was? I mean, that was a miserable day, nonstop, just rain. They turned the lights on, thankfully. But if you listen to the call that I did, there is a moment on the far turn when Vino Rosso, who was in the St. Elias green silks, was so muddy, the silks looked black.
Yeah.
And there's a little hesitation in my voice. You can hear it because I'm like, who is that? And you just, your instincts, where you're supposed to be. Have you said his name yet? And I went with it. So you have to trust your prep. You have to trust your eye. But the prep comes into play when they turn for home. And even though Justify has been in front the whole way, Bob Baffert uses a blue shadow roll. And talk about memory burns. I have a memory burn of looking at Justify in the binoculars with that blue shadow roll. Because there was multiple horses wearing the same silks that year. Audible was in Windstar silks. I think there was 3 of them. So it wasn't always just us. We always had to think about, okay, is that Audible? I can't remember the other horse they had in. So it's just,
what are the things that stand out from you that in this weather I have to call?
Yeah. And a blue shadow roll stuck out. When it's a real ugly day, it's an old adage in racing. The silks of the winners tend to be pretty clean. So that helps. But yeah, Vino Rosso on the far turn, that was daunting. Those looked like black silks, not green.
I'm thinking over your 10 years, what you start with American Pharoah?
Yeah.
Seriously?
It's true.
Justify last year. I mean, you quite possibly could have called and witnessed some of the greatest races that we've ever seen in horse races in our time.
And it's funny you say that because we talk about it, friends of ours that work at the racetrack and stuff, like for whatever reason, the Derby just always seems to deliver. And it really has ramped up in the last 5 to 10 years, starting with Pharaoh, and even California Chrome before that, some of those stories. But it just, from whatever happened last year to the drama with Maximum Security and the disqualification, and obviously Triple Crown winners sprinkled around there. Rich Strike, who wasn't even in the race the day before, gets in, wins the race. Just this improbable. I mean, it's just, I don't know. There's something about that race. It's got a good thing going. Hopefully it doesn't stop for a while. I think, talk about luck. I happen to be lucky enough to jump on the wagon in 2015.
And I always get very caught up in the stories, right? You're really studying silks. What are all the indicators that I need? How are these horses performing so I can see, like you said, Fierceness. How is Fierceness going to step out of the starting gate? Are you following too, though, and can get swept up in the stories behind these horses, right? We learned so much just about, Larry Demerit last year. And I get hooked on that. And I hope that people that are new to racing do too. So they understand passion that these folks have for this race, right? Like there's just something so incredible about it that people put everything they have into it, not just the trainer, but everybody around them. And do you kind of then follow along into that too and cheer these people on kind of inside your head, in the back of your head, not while you're calling a race, but you have to get wrapped up in that.
Yeah, I mean, so since I started hosting the post-position draw, I try and pull upon some of those stories to share them because obviously a post-position draw can be a sort of mundane event when you pull a pill and you hang up the silk. So I try and provide some storylines there. So I talk to a lot of these guys. I talk to the owners, the trainers. I've talked to breeders, talked to jockeys. And so there's, that's what's great about the Derby. Every year there's 20 different stories, and obviously some are more compelling than others. But once that draw is over, I try and extract emotion out of what I'm doing, insofar as I don't even listen to my old Kentucky home so I can avoid the emotion that comes with that. I mean, I could hear it through the glass when the crowd screams or when they that weep no more.
How do you block that out? Do you put on like headsets or earphones?
Well, luckily, I turn all the volumes are down on my headset. Yep. And I take my headset off for that part of it. But I can still hear the crowd through the glass. Ever since they expanded that first turn, the energy around the Derby is unlike any other, I think, maybe in the world. And so you can just feel the energy. And it's really about trying to, a lot of bing bong, bing bongs.
You're doing bing bong in between every race, aren't you?
Walking around like
I'm gonna remember that one.
Mental
just to
patience.
calm my nerves sometimes. And people always talk about the sound of the crowd and how it will unnerve many of these world-class horses that are on the track. You have to feel that noise too. It must kind of almost reverberate where you are, and to be able to kind of block that out in a way has to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, when they had the new paddock and they had the first turn grandstand built, whatever they call it, first turn 1, and Churchill Downs sits in a sea of people on Derby Day. It's just such an amazing view. When Patrick Mahomes did Riders Up, the energy in that plant was unreal for what felt like 20 to 25 minutes, which is about how long it is from Riders Up to when they go into the gate. And you could just feel it. You could really hear the crowd scream for him. You could hear him when they came on the track. And it is arguably more challenging than calling the race itself, is not getting swept up into that and just, having the nerves take over and the anxiety take over. You really just got to try and buckle down. Like I said, you bing bong, deep breaths, multiple trips down to the bathroom, even if you don't have to go, just to get the blood moving and to get your muscles moving. You're not thinking about things. It's gotten it much more challenging since they've expanded the plant, and you see all these people and you feel it. You really do. You feel it.
And what I'm noticing about a lot of people that I'm talking to this spring ahead of the Derby, people that I admire, you're one of them. Steve Buttleman, I adore Steve Buttleman and just kindness in his heart that he shows for everyone that takes time to come up to him. Everybody I've spoke with is the same in the sense of no matter how great you are at what you do, what I'm hearing, Travis, just like Steve Buttleman, you are still critiquing and fine tuning. You said earlier, I had to work on some things, and I'm thinking, what does he have to work? He doesn't have anything to work on. That's always amazed by people that no matter where they are, you think they're great. You're still fine tuning and you still want to improve.
Yeah. It's and I don't want to compare Steve or I to a professional golfer, but I remember hearing an interview with, I think it was Webb Simpson, said he was talking to Arnold Palmer about how he could find another half stroke throughout his round over X number of rounds. I was like, man, a half stroke, that matters. Or I remember Johnny Velasquez talking about riding horses, and he said, you can lose a race by a nose. And maybe it's that one thing you did or didn't do as a jockey that you need to start to do to make up that nose. And it was like, man, that is such precision and intensity, which I enjoy. And yeah, it's like a never ending pursuit. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit it. In my bag next to me, I have 2 books on writing poems. I'm not really a poet. I don't really want to write poetry, but poems and poetry has a lot of things that I think apply to race calling. Sure enough, in one of the books, there's 3 or 4 passages, out of 50 pages where I'm like, man, that does apply to race calling. And, I highlight it up and I'll make a note of it. Just, you never know where you're going to pick something up that can help you do what you do. Even in the Derby call last year, I mean, it went fine. I'm proud of it. There's a few things I want to tweak or work on this year, or try and make sound better, or, shuffle out the back door. Like, I don't want to do that again. Every year there's always something.
I know a lot of people probably make really strange requests of you. Hey, will you call my wedding, or will you call the birthday party? Do you get strange fan requests? And some of them you're like, nah, I don't want to waste my voice on that, or I don't want to wear myself out.
You know what? A lot of times, it was like, hey, give me a sample call, which is just, I don't know. For me, it's just
Like
weird.
In the grocery store? Hey, Travis, give me a sample call down aisle 5.
I'll give you so I ref basketball in the winter to kind of stay active. I really enjoy it. And there's a bunch of us in the locker room, either moving to the next game, or, some of us were changing or whatever. And they go, let us hear a sample. And I'm like, I'm not going to pretend to call a race in front of a bunch of referees. So the way I was taught to diffuse that is, all right, you start racing around the room and I'll start calling it. And like, nobody ever wants to do that.
Nobody wants to do that. That's
I'm not gonna sink his name, but I did have a fellow announcer once ask me on Derby Day if they could put on the big board their friend's wedding announcement that they were going to come to the races that day. And I was like, dude, this is Derby Day. A, no.
No, we're not doing that.
I can't believe you asked. So, yeah, there's always something. I have, not really a Churchill, some of the smaller tracks I worked at, I have slipped friends' names into calls here or there just to see if somebody's paying attention or what have you. Yeah. Those
like sportscasters that decide to use a Taylor Swift song when they do their highlights, or
what? That's
mention WWE. Oh, you could do that. You could like mention WWE wrestling names, slip them in.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm not big on puns and like cliches and things like that. And it's just so ironic you bring this up, because I just read in that poetry book that cliches have no place in poetry. Okay. I was like, you know what? They don't have a place in race calling either. No. Like, I don't need to do what other guys have done in the past, or other gals have done in the past, or get hokey. I mean, I will. There was remember that Donald Trump tweet, like that Kofefe. There was that really good sprinter Kofefe. I kind of played on that a little bit, but nothing over the top. Never making it about myself. I actually get way more joy out of dropping things in calls that only certain people are going to pick up on. I'm a huge Seinfeld fan, so if there's a horse with any sort of Seinfeld name, you can guarantee that I'm going to have some sort of Seinfeld reference to it. And I was a little bit more overt about it when Right Off Jerry ran at Churchill, and I actually did a whole Seinfeld line. But the more subtle ones are the ones that I enjoy the most.
Could you hear people reacting to it?
I got a couple of texts right off the bat.
Or Ed DeRosa texts you, hey,
oh yeah,
or somebody will give you a text.
Yeah, and those that text, they instantly move up the pecking order in my life, because that means you're a Seinfeld fan too.
They were listening closely too.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. Good luck this weekend. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, and come say hello anytime. I mean, Derby right around the corner.
I know. I'm going to come say hello.
But
I will not bother you when you're preparing, I promise.
If I'm doing bing bong, don't knock.
I'm going to totally steal that prep line. I'm totally taking that. That is such great advice.
Yeah.
That is such great advice.
Thank you.